So, here's the top 10 talents in Deepwoken. Starting off with number 10, being Charismatic Cast. Charismatic Cast grants the user 10% damage reduction when their opponent is charmed, which can happen from mantras or certain talents that would proc charm originally. This talent is rated number 10 on the list due to it needing tough love in order to get its 10% melee and 5% mantra damage buff. Number 9 on the list would be Exoskeleton. Exoskeleton gives the user 10% natural armor that counts as physical resistance. It's extremely helpful in multitude of situations, as it's essentially 10% physical armor that negates 75% of the enemy pen. It's rated number 9 on the list due to it having a drawback of having low durability. Most of the time in fights, it will last until you get around 30 to 50% HP before the durability runs out and the natural armor buff is gone. Number 8 on the list will be Ever-Changing Aegis. Ever-Changing Aegis grants a 20% elemental damage reduction buff when hit by a blank element. However, a 10% increase when exposed to a new element in which your Aegis will switch to whatever element hit you. This is number 8 on the list because unless you're fighting against a Saint Sworn or double attunement builds which lack good sustain buffs, you should be entirely fine. But the reason why it's not in a higher spot is of course because of the drawback in those situations where if you're inside of a solo game or fighting against a Saint Sworn player, you are exposed. Number 7 on the list is going to be Manipulator. Many people don't know what Manipulator is, as it's a 75 charisma talent, so let me explain. If your opponent is charmed, then your critical will do an extra 20% damage. If you pair this up with unnecessary theatrics, then you can spam a critical proc a Manipulator all day. The only drawback of this talent is that it's restricted to being behind charm, which is why it's not in the higher area. Number 6 was pretty tough to decide, as most of the talents above this section are really good. I decided that Lose Your Mind will take this spot, as it's a 15% damage increase when tier 3, which is extremely easy to do if you obtain Heretic Sutra. This pairs well with Piercing Will, which is why it's in number 5. Piercing Will gives a 15% pen increase and starts to stack up by 5% per insanity level, capping up at, of course, 15% pen. Pen is extremely helpful and handy in a large amount of situations, as having a simple 15% pen could mean in having a 5 to 10 damage difference. Number 4 on the list is going to be Spine Cutter. Spine Cutter is a talent where if you roll cancel an M1 behind your opponent, you do an extra guaranteed swing that will do raw damage of your weapon. It's not rated higher than number 4 because you have to hit your opponent from behind, along with it only scaling off your base damage with all multipliers. 3 on the list is going to be Speed Demon. Despite the recent nerfs of Speed Demon going down from 30% to 20%, Speed Demon still grants a 20% M1 buff with a 1 second cooldown as long as you have a speed buff enabled. This talent is near busted when you take into consideration that there are many talents that grant parry buffs like Fast Blade, extending the speed boost you get after parrying, which would easily allow you to dish out a mean amount of damage. On the semifinal, it's going to be Million Ton Piercer. Million Ton Piercer unlocks the pen cap from 50% to an infinite amount, which means that you can potentially have 100% pen nullifying all of your enemy's armor, which would mean that if you have a high damage hitting build, you can do 1 bar per M1. Finally, the best card of all time that has been nerfed many times is going to be Reinforced Armor. Reinforced Armor lowers your enemy's pen by 30%. At first glance, you'd think that's that crazy, but if your opponent doesn't have Million Piercer, like most builds, they probably have 30 to 50% pen on their build. If you negate 30% of that, that would mean that your armor would be a near 100% full effect. If you have 50% physical, now your opponent's M1s and attunements mantras are now reduced by 50% alone, not even accounting the other damage reduction that will most likely be on your build like Exoskeleton or Charismatic Cast. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, then make sure to like and subscribe, as that helps me out a lot, along with joining the Discord, as there's plenty of builds that can pique your interest like one-shot builds per se. Other than that, I hope you have a nice day.